Yuiwin,
Fab.
hi. Welcome to Culture Camp. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for
Um,
having me.
Yuiwin, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization?
So my name's Yuiwin Tsang. I'm the founder at Disruptive Thinking. We are a sales and marketing agency, and we do some consultancy work. And work with a really broad range of different clients as well. And I do all manner of things with the business, but also things that I really enjoy doing are things like podcasts, meeting clients, looking at problems, and I really enjoy looking after the team.
Yeah, and your podcast is a good one. We will link it below. It's I've been on your podcast, but I've also listened to quite a few of the other ones. You've always got really interesting guests on as well. Um, so we decided to talk today about trust and building a culture of trust within your organization. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your perspectives on that, and particularly in your sector, in your industry as well. Obviously, with Brilliant Thing, we work a lot in the public sector, in communities, and you've got a slightly different audience. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure. So I work, or my company works predominantly in the private sector. So we work with corporations of all sorts of sizes, some smaller ones and some bigger ones. And trust is a really interesting topic, I think, in the sense that when you read any business books or you attend any business webinars and they talk about an effective organization, they talk about things like delegation, they talk about things like giving your team autonomy, and all of that really good stuff comes from a foundation of trust. And it's understanding and knowing that things will get done, they'll be done in a certain way, people will conduct themselves in the way that you expect, without you having to check on them all the time and making sure that they're doing it because you trust that they will do it. So it's such an important thing that often gets overlooked when you look at these, process. When you look at a guide to how to delegate, there's very little that the word trust actually pops up. So it's just understanding how important it is with these interactions between yourself and your team, if you're in a leadership role, but also when you work in private sector, between your organization and your clients as well.
Yeah, and I think in the voluntary sector and community sector, trust is talked about quite a lot, but I think trust is often I trust you because you've had the same experience as me, or you've kind of been through something together with me. That's often I trust because it's something to do with empathy and understanding. But I wonder if there's other ways that we can create trust, within our organizations, within our teams, but also within the partners and people that we work with who we might not have such a long-standing relationship with.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think trust does come from that place from empathy and shared experience. I think the challenges come about are when you don't know what those shared experiences might be, and I guess one of the most powerful things that you can do is to create situations or scenarios where people feel safe,
Sure.
where people feel like they are able to trust you, or it's safe to trust you. As an example, from an internal perspective, if you're managing a member of staff, for example, and you need to have a meeting with them about a particular thing, one technique that I came across a long time ago was to set out from the very top what the context and what the purpose is of that meeting.
Okay.
So this is about whatever it might be, and the purpose of the meeting is to achieve this. And it almost sets the guardrails for that meeting, and it sets the boundaries that within which you operate, and it's also within which the person that you're speaking with operates as well. And having those guardrails in place means that their expectations are there, and it's really easy for you to meet those expectations because you set them out from the front.
Yeah, and those I like that image of guardrails because I guess they're there when you need them, but not kind of encroaching on your space all the time. And I've definitely worked with teams and groups where there's been a reluctance to hold those boundaries, or a reluctance to um, kind of communicate what those boundaries are, which then leads people to not trusting, even if they wouldn't like the feeling of the boundaries being there. So sometimes people want to have that kind of free reign, and initially feel that any kind of boundaries around their work or around their team are something that's going to kind of disrupt their working or stop their working. But actually, it's those boundaries provide safety, don't they?
There is definitely definitely that, and I think there's always the balance you need to make, that you're not kind of suppressing creativity, or
Sure.
this kind of like or this kind of energy, or this curiosity, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the challenge. But if you think of it in that light, how can you create a safe environment, a safe space, a safe culture where people can express themselves, where people can work to the best that they can be,
Mm-hmm.
um, but where within which you can set these guardrails, where you can set these kind
Yeah.
of boundaries, that doesn't suppress those kind of those
Mm.
traits and those skills and that experience and that creativity that's within your team.
Yeah.
And that's a really positive framing of the challenge that you have, is that, how can
Mm-hmm.
you establish trust to get the best out of people, is a really nice, is a really quite nice way of kind of positioning the challenge in
Mm-hmm.
front of you.
Yeah, and with that example that you gave of the meeting where you have to communicate something, setting out the context, setting out the what that meeting's there for, let's think about a little bit wider then. So within your team, what are some ways that you kind of create boundaries around the work, or create those environments where trust can be fostered?
I guess every situation is quite
Mm,
different. And there'll be some where it's really fun, it's really positive, and it might be that we've got particular restraints on a project. Perhaps it's the budget, for example, and we've
sure.
got to work within some kind of particular financial restraints, which are really quite straightforward. The
Mm,
the, the really tricky examples, I think, are the ones where there's been something that's impacting negatively on culture, that can negatively impact on the rest of the team in some sort of way. Those are
mm,
the problems where, if you don't have a way of fixing them, they can grow and they can kind of fester, and it's like
mm.
it's like a mushroom that just kind of grows in the dark.
Yeah,
And what we need to do is kind of put some light on it. So it's,
yeah.
how do you, as a manager, as a leader, bring those things into light, but still keep like a positive
Mm,
way of doing it? And one of my favorite things, again, that I picked up from a coach years ago, Kerry, was we spend a lot of our time catching people doing things wrong. We
mm,
should spend more of our time catching people doing things right. Because all these little
mm,
things where they do things really well, those are the little bits that you have to have these type more challenging conversations. So one of these conversations we had was just how a particular individual engaged and worked with other people in the team. And
mhm,
he was quite difficult. He was quite highly strung, and he was quite abrasive at times. Incredibly talented editor,
mhm.
um, really passionate about his work, but it was just hard work at times.
Sure.
Um, and that whole principle of catching him doing something right.
Mm,
So he did a project, he did it really well, and he worked with this particular member of staff. So we sat down for a one-to-one. Context of the meeting, context and purpose, was just to have a
mhm,
look at your work, and purpose is to how can we get things a bit better. So that was the setting of the scene. And then using that project where he did really well,
mhm.
just said, you've done this project really well, you worked incredibly well with such and such on the commercial team,
Yeah.
um, which is really good.
Mhm.
Um, what's changed was the question that
Sure.
I asked. So he immediately kind of went from, oh yeah, it did work quite well, and he acknowledged that was different to what it was
Mhm,
before. Which
mhm.
meant that we were able to talk about some of the challenges that he had before. And that's when stuff started to come out,
Yeah.
He was having some challenges at home. There's lots of things that
Yeah.
we didn't know about from a
Mhm,
work perspective that were having quite a big bearing on this. And it just meant that, because he felt safe to talk about these things, because you kind of framed it in a particular way where it's like, look, this is really positive, and this is something that you've done that we're really happy with.
mhm.
Um, what's enabled it? What's
Yeah.
changed? What
Yeah.
happened? And then he talked a bit more. He said, I came in this morning and I, had a different attitude to my work, or, whatever it was that he did at the
Mm,
time, that then unearthed the rest of the conversation about some of the other challenges that he had. And again, this comes back to that part of empathy, because then it's like, well, actually,
yeah.
I've gone through similar experience, or there's other
Sure.
people that are doing this sort of thing. And then that starts to build that
Yeah.
level of trust.
Yeah. And I guess having that kind of coaching culture within your organization helps levels of trust rise. And takes time and is a slightly different approach from maybe other organizations. So I wonder what happens when your team grows, or you take on a new project where you're working with different people, or somebody leaves. When you're kind of managing transition and change within your organization, how do you think that relates to either the levels of trust or the way that you're supporting your team to develop?
This is such a lovely question. I think it's we've been going through a period of change, and so my co-founder left the business,
Okay.
or and for her own reasons, very very amicable. We still get on. She's one of our clients now, and there's probably another conversation for another time as the reasons behind it. So we've hired in, so we brought somebody new in as well. But it was a really interesting journey for the rest of the team, because obviously my co-founder had been with us since the very start.
Mm,
And for her to leave was quite unsettling for the team.
sure.
And then for somebody else coming in, we spoke earlier about the change of dynamics within the team, because
Mm,
especially when you're in a small team of, five, one new
yeah,
person coming in is 20%, is different.
sure.
So it's a big chunk. So with my co-founder leaving, what I found really helped was being really transparent in
Mm,
terms of, well, in terms of the reasons for her leaving, first of all, but also what happens next. So as a leader of an organization that's going through change, you need to show that you have a plan, and
yeah.
that you have a strategy kind of moving forward. And you need to be able to communicate that and articulate that plan and articulate that vision really well,
Hmm.
because that's what people look for. I certainly feel like with my team, what they looked to me for was reassurance,
Mm,
that things are going to be okay.
yeah.
And it's not that you need to sugarcoat things either. Again, it's
Hmm.
that transparency, it's that kind of honesty piece. And I guess this depends on the type of organization that you work for, and what, if you've got open book accounting or whatever it is.
Mm,
But it's to be clear in terms of what the challenges are. And my team particularly appreciated the fact that there wasn't a sugar coating on it. That
mm,
we got some bumps ahead of us that we need to get over, and we can, and this is how we're going to do it. So on that side of things, being kind of open, being transparent, I think is really important when it comes to establishing that level of trust,
mm,
um, and also being open, and listening to people as well. I think
mm,
is really really important.
yeah.
Um, in regards to the new person joining the team,
Mm,
I, Kerry, I think the biggest kind of learning I've had from my experience is that you kind of need to, um, you yourself need to be quite open. It's
hmm.
really weird. It's almost
Yeah.
like a flip reversal of things,
Mm,
really. You kind of need to be open, and accepting that, first of all, things aren't perfect within your own organization.
sure.
Um, and you also need to be willing to listen to feedback and
Mhm.
take on that feedback, constructive feedback, and be willing to change and adapt.
Mm,
Um, that level of vulnerability, I think, that you're able to display
yeah.
makes it feel safe for the new person coming in to display that same level of vulnerability. It's not kind of
Yeah.
like, oh my God, we don't know what's going on and we haven't
Yeah.
got a clue
Yeah.
what's happening. It's more a case of like, we're not perfect. We want to get
Mm.
better.
And we
Um,
brought you in because we want to learn something from you as well as shape you.
yeah, I think that is it. And I think if but as I say, my experience from my learning from it is that it makes you take a moment to reflect a
Mm,
bit more, and I think that's something that when you've got work coming in through the doors, you've got projects landing, you've got deadlines falling all around you. Perhaps we don't spend as much time as we need to kind of reflecting
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
thinking back on how our day, our week, our month has been, and how that's affected us personally. And I guess the next stage from that is when we understand how things affect us, is then how that kind of snowballs, or not snowballs, but how that cascades to the rest of our team.
Yeah.
So it's just understanding that and understanding how this change affects you, and then how it will affect other people. And then when you understand that, when you've got a hand on that, you can start to manage it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've definitely been part of teams that have changed quite a bit. And I think one of my bugbears is when there's a sort of culture in the organization that kind of prevents new people saying, in my last job, or we used to do it like this. And there's sometimes a bit of a closing down of that kind of thinking, when actually, of course, you want those ideas to come in, or you want to at least consider them, if not adopting some of them. And one of my best experiences when I entered a new team was I was asked to keep a sort of diary for 100 days, but not a diary of what we were doing. So it was a diary of what's excited me today and what have I got questions about, or what am I wondering. And I did end up sharing that with my line manager. But I had no obligation to share it, but it was really interesting because it kind of encouraged me to stay open and curious, but also feedback some of the things that I found really exciting about the work that maybe people had just sort of got used to, or had kind of forgotten about. So that was a really positive experience of kind of entering a new team.
That's lovely. I remember I was listening to a podcast, or what it was, but it was a bit depressing actually. They said, like, when kids first go to school, or before they go to school, they're asking, Dad, what's this? Dad, what's that? How
Yeah.
does it happen? Why is this? Da, da, da. And they are so curious. They're like sponges, and they want to know everything, and they want to know how little things work, and why
Yeah.
something is like this, and why it's like. And then they go through their school career, and by the time they leave, they can't wait to leave. They can't wait to, like, not have any more homework and things like this. And I think
Yeah.
that it's a bit sad that they lose that curiosity, and it's just sparked me thinking just then, as you talked about that, how if we do that, spend that bit of time to reflect, and we do ask our team to kind of reflect, what's, as you say, what's exciting you, what's really fascinating you, what are you
Yeah.
curious about, it makes them think a little bit more. It makes them reflect, and as I say, we don't perhaps spend as much time as we ought to kind of reflecting on.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe, with having an organization comes responsibility for creating an environment and a culture for people. And I wonder if, having that focus on curiosity and reflection could become really quite different in a load of organizations who are kind of doing things by the book.
Yeah, I think you see, I mean, you see lots of organizations that kind of go into this very process-driven way of working, very process. A friend of mine used to call it a very blue. So he used to talk about the different colors of organizations. You start off quite red, quite kind of like, he called it like hero-driven. There's normally like one founder making all the decisions, kind of emotionally kind of driven, and then the business scales to the point where it's blue, and it becomes all process focused, and it needs to do that in order to scale efficiently, effectively. But then it gets to a point when it becomes too process orientated. And I think this is the point that we talk about, where, like, it comes back to that we're squashing the creativity and the spark and the innovation within your teams, because they are adhering too much to process. Whereas if you comes back to trust again, if you trust them, you give them the guardrails, you give them the boundaries, but you trust them to do what they need to do in between, then that I think unlocks something within an organization.
Yeah. Lovely rounding up and bringing us back to the point as well, Ewan. Well done. It's been lovely having a chat with you. And there's another conversation that I was about to start there, but I feel like that's for another day around leadership. But yeah, always really inspiring to chat to you, Ewan. So thank you for being part of Culture Camp. I wonder why people can find out more about your work and your organization.
Just check out our website, which is www.hellodisruptive.com. And the podcast I work on is a beautiful business podcast. So if you just look
Yeah.
on all the usual channels, you have a look on there. And that's probably one of my favorite parts of my work, is I get to chat with really interesting people on there as well.
Yeah, fab. We will link those below and send them out as well. So thanks, Yuiwin. It's been lovely.